about 15 lines from the top of the page. The question the Gemara is going to ask now actually sounds very similar to a discussion we had yesterday between the Shlokish and Rabbi Lozer, and Tesis actually wonders what's going on, and he doesn't give an answer. But here it goes. So we learned in our Mishnah. Basically, what we're discussing now is you brought a carbon, but you had the wrong carbon in mind, so that's called shaloi lishma. You didn't take the carbon and do it properly, having the right carbon in mind. And there the din is that the animal is still kosher, you still proceed with the carbon, except that the owner was not his obligation. He still has to bring another carbon to replace it. And then we talked also about shinei bailas. He had the wrong person in mind. The same thing. So says the Gemara, Yiboy have a question. Kipru al mashabo alay kipru. Okay, what do we say is you continue bringing the animal, even though you did a shaloi l'shmoi, you continue bringing the animal and you try to do everything correctly now. Was it effective or not? Did it atone the others for their sin or not? That's the question. Omar Rav Sheisha Ravida Mistabra, the only logical conclusion can be the like kipru. That when you continue bringing this carbon, the first carbon, it didn't achieve anything. The haraya, we tell the owner, bring another carbon to satisfy your obligation. Now, why bring another carbon if the first carbon that you continue bringing already fulfilled that obligation and you had a kapara? Obviously, you bring the first carbon, but there's no kapara. That's why you bring the second one. The Isagdata Kipru, if you tell me the first carbon already fulfilled the kapara, then Sheni Lam Huba. What do you need the second carbon for? So the Gemara counters. So Velamai, what's your argument? That the first carbon achieved the kapara. So then the question is, so why Taket Velamai? Sorry, what do you say? Like Kipru, the first carbon did not achieve its kapara, and that is why you bring a second one. That's what you're saying. So I have a very simple question. So why are you bringing the first one? Once you made a mistake and ruined it, it's not achieving anything. Why bring it at all? Lamu Kadev, why bringing the first one? This is what he meant to ask. If you tell me that the first carbon did not achieve its kapara, then I understand why you're bringing a second one, but I also understand why you continue bringing the first one. Why? Because you bring it because initially you set it aside, it was done properly. So therefore, even though you messed up in the middle, you continue bringing it. And second one comes to be to do that kapara. But if you can tell me that the first carbon already did the kapara, then sheni lamuba. Why do you need the second one? And what the logic is, why you bring the first one is we already had before. The pasuk. It says in the pasuk, "Moitzis vasecha tishmar." You should keep whatever you promised, and it talks about a neder. And then it says, "And this animal which is in a dove." And we asked, why are you starting out with a neder and then you're concluding with an adova when they're very different? The neder is when you say, I take upon myself, harei alai. And the adova is when you say, harei zu, this animal will be a carbon. And we answered, it's talking about a case where you started out as a neder and then you messed up. So we say, okay, you're not going to fulfill your neder, but nevertheless continue bringing it up as a carbon adova. Okay, so that's what he said, more or less what he's saying here as well.
Do you get any credit for it?
Sorry?
You get any credit?
Yes, you have a mitzvah called Nadava. You have a mitzvah to do whatever you made. That's what the pasuk tells you.
You just don't get kapara.
That's it. You don't get kapara, but you still have a mitzvah to bring it up. Yeah. Okay. Further, the Gemara says now we have another interesting query. You bring, let's say, a carbon oil. A carbon oil is to atone for the mitzvahs aseh that you did. And we learned already before that a carbon oil, we learned yesterday, a carbon oil does not only forgive you for one mitzvah aseh, but for all the mitzvahs aseh. You did a number of averas, you bring one carbon oil, and it's a carbon for all of them. What about, okay, you set aside a carbon a month before you go for Yom Tov, and you know you're going to the Shalayim on Yom Tov, so you set it aside, let's say, in Elul. What happens to all the Avedas that you did post the Hafrasha, post you setting it aside? When you bring this carbon, let's say Chalamoid Sukkos, will it atone for all the mitzvahs aseh that you were over between Elul and then, even post the Hafrasha? Or once you mafresh it, that's it? In the future, you'll have to bring another carbon oil. Which one is it? Says the Gemara. Does it also atone for those asays after the hafrosha? It only atones for the ones that the avelis you did prior to the hafrosha. But once you did the hafrosha, that's it. You can't add any more avelis to that carbon. That's the question. And what's the question? I'll more explain further. Do we compare it to a chatas? And what do we know about a carbon chatas? Ma chatas, the koydem hafrosha. By a chatas, we know that it has to be the aveda had to happen before you set it aside, because the pasuk says that you found out you did a chatas. In other words, you did the aveda already. So a carbon chatas you set aside after you did the aveda. So la'achar hafrosha. But if you did the aveda after you set aside the animal, it's not included. So av hochanami, maybe the same thing is by a carbon oil. The koydem hafrosha, whatever aveda you did prior to setting aside good is included. But any averis you did post the setting aside is not included.
But wouldn't you be chayiv to a second chatos anyway?
Oh, we'll see in a minute. Perhaps like damya lechatas, you cannot compare an oila to a chatas because a chatas is exclusive for one aveda at a time. The chatas are kol chet v'chet boy. Chatas is required for every single aveda separate, like you just asked. So therefore, obviously, if you did the aveda afterwards, it's not going to help. When it comes to an oila can include many avedas. So maybe it can even include those avedas that you did post the hafrosha, post the setting it aside. Says the Gemara, so the chata kol chet v'chet boy lasui chot v'chatas, you bring a separate chatas. But the hacha here when it comes to an oil, kivan, this is part of the question. Kivan the ika kame asay gabe mechapra, you can have a number of assays included in one carbon. Perhaps a asay del achar hafrosha nami mechapra. Perhaps an assay even after the hafrosha it forgives as well. That's the most question, and we're going to try to answer it. Toshmak over here, it says in pasuk. It says in pasuk you should place your hand. You should place your hand on the head of the oila, and then it says v'nirtzaloi, and then it'll be forgiven to you. It'll be a kapara on you. Sounds like that the smicha is what makes the kapara. We know we learned before, but learn later that the kapara is the zrika, the sprinkling of the blood on the mizbech. But from this pasuk,
how do you explain the difference between kapara and ritzui?
it's the same thing. It's the same thing.
Sometimes it says it's v'chipe v'nirtza. So gives the two words.
In this pasuk, it says v'nirtza loy lichaper olav. Nirtza means it's accepted. Nirtza means accepted. So it was accepted to be an atonement.
So it's the same thing essentially. Okay.
It's almost the same thing, but nirtza means literally it was accepted to be a your atonement. Like the end of the Seder, we said nirtza, that everything we did here now has been accepted l'mayla. So it sounds like the smicha is what does the atonement, and that's a problem. The smicha does atonement. We know that it's the blood, the sprinkling of the blood that does the kapara. It's a clear pasuk. It says that the person, the blood of the nefesh of a person is in the blood, and I gave it to you, so you put it on mizbech, and that is what's mechaper, because hadam hu ba nefesh yechaper. Clearly, it's the blood, the sprinkling of mizbech kapara, not the smicha. What does it mean that smicha makes it a kapara? It means as follows. So this is what the Brisa says. If you treat the smicha like shir mitzvah, you treat smicha like a leftover mitzvah. No, it's not important. No, it's neglected. You don't do it. And now the truth of the matter is, it's not ma'akiv. The carbon is still a carbon. But ma'ila olav hakasar, we will treat it ki'ilu loy-kippur. We will treat it as if you did not do a kapara, but it's still an effective kapara. In other words, something happened here that you didn't do properly, but nevertheless, the animal is a kapara. So what's going on here? What's the light keeper? What's the keeper? It seems like there's two stages here. One part is not a kapara, one part is. What does that mean? So this is maybe what it means. In some respects, there was no kapara, and for certain things, there was a kapara. What? My love, the keeper, I say the koydem hafrosha, this will atone for all those avedas he did prior to setting aside the animal. And like keeper, I say the smicha. And it will not be kapara for the aveda he just did right now. What aveda you do right now? He didn't do smicha. And the Torah says v'samach yada, you should do smicha, so you were over an asay. And you should know the carbon will not atone you for this aveda. And why not? Because it took place after the hafrosha. So here you have an answer to your question that the oil will only forgive for those avedas that took place before the hafrasha. The havla say lach hafrasha. Clear answer. That's how we're understanding right now. Says Rava, who told you? Oh, my Rava says Rava. I say the smicha kamrit. You're right.
Is a separate mitzvah.
Sorry.
Smicha is a separate mitzvah.
Exactly, and that's the point. Our question was, will the Oila forgive you? The Oila will forgive you as many Averis as he did, mitzvah say. Will it also forgive you for those Averis he did after the Hafrosha? Here we see that it does not forgive you for the Averis Smicha. Doesn't that prove that it does not forgive for those Asay that took place after the Hafrosha? That's the point we're trying to say. So the Gemara says no. Could be that the Smicha, that all the Asays will be forgiven, even those after the Hafrosha. But Smicha is different. Because when are you over the Avera Smicha? The mitzvah smicha, even though we have a rule, we have the Gemara Kedusha place, take if the smicha shchita, we would like you to bring the smicha as close as possible, in close proximity to the shchita. But really, if you did before, it doesn't really make a big difference. When are you over that say that you did of smicha? Only when you can no longer do smicha. And when is that? Once you kill the animal. So it's not that you over that say after you set aside the animal. You're over that say after you shechted already. And after you shechted, nobody asked if the oiler should forgive you for Avedas after you killed the animal already. Our question was, before you shechted the animal, but you already set it aside, what happens to those mitzvahs? But the mitzvah smicha, you were not over till after the shechita. Of course, it's not included. That's what the Gemara says to Rabba, proves nothing. So the Rabba says, Amar Rabba, I say this with a kamet, shiny husband called kamet le'shachid. As long as you didn't shecht it by amud v'samaka, you're not over anything. You have an obligation to go into smicha. Amos have assay. When are you over this assay? Only la'achashchita. After you shechted the animal, that's it. You can no longer do smicha. Now you're over. La'achashchita, loikem boilam. And after shchita, was never a question. Of course, the oiler cannot forgive for a way that you did, and you did after the shchita. Yeah, says the Gemara. I said, Gemara, Amalei Rav Huna Bar Yehuda. Rav Huna said, the Rava, Ema. I mean, the Gemara says you decided that keeper means for all the Avedas prior, and maybe prior to the shchita, and like keeper is for smicha, which is after shchita. I can tell you there's another way of learning. Ema, why don't we say keeper is gavra? Maybe keeper means that it forgives the person completely for all the Avedas, maybe even smicha. And light keeper is kapishmaya. Light keeper means you thought it's talking about two different things. That some things it is mechapa, some things you don't know. We're talking about the same mitzvahs, but all those mitzvahs that what do you call it? That you did the oil will be mechapa the person, but the Eibushet does not have nachas from it because you did not do it with the smicha. Maybe the tone's even for smicha as well. Says the Gemara. In fact, me like tonight.
What's the difference? I don't understand the difference between the two.
But you said it's not to atone you for smicha at all. I'm saying maybe he does. And what do you mean, like keeper? Like keeper, the Abish has no nachas. He didn't do it right. He didn't do a mitzvah, not mufcha. But as far as the person that he did everything, nothing's missing in the carbon. Says the Gemara, and I'll prove it to you. Me like didn't we learn? By mitzvah, you take the oil and you put it on the earlobes, the thumbs, and on the forehead. So what happens? There's leftover oil in the spoon, ashar kaf. So it says in the pasuk, what the kohen does is he places on the forehead of the person who's becoming tight. So the Rabbi Kiva's opinion. It says you put it on in order to be a kapara. So he takes it literally. In Nasan, you place the excess oil on the forehead, keep it. But if he did not place it on the forehead, then like keep it. There's no kapara. Rabbi Kiva, no kapara at all. Rabbi Yechon ben Noidi says, no. Shiyari mitzvah. This oil is merely an excess. It's only leftovers, remnants of a mitzvah. If you didn't do it, it doesn't in any way prevent you fulfilling your kapara, everything else. Bein nitin, bein shaloi nitin, keep it. Whether you place the oil or not, kapara. But because you didn't put the excess on the head, we will treat it ki'ilu like keep it. As if you didn't. What do you mean as if you didn't? You just said it's a kapara. You just said it's a kapara. What do you mean ki'ilu like keep it? Mikey Lakipper. If he means to say, well, go bring another carbon so you can do properly with all the oil. I mean, you just said, you just said it's a good full kapara. Ela kippur. You know what kippur means? Gavra. The person has a full kapara. But like kippur, at the same time, kapishmai. The Gabid Hashem, you didn't give the Hashem. Remember, we'll learn later, we had before. There are 6 things that you have to do by a carbon, and one of them is to give the Eibush nachas. And that's missing here. The Eibush is not satisfied. You didn't do it properly. Is hachanami kippur. So why can't I say the same thing over here? What I just said. That kippur means the person is all fixed up over there by the carbon oil if he did not do the smicha. But like kippur means Hashem does not have full nachas from you. Says the Gemara, no. Hasam nami, no. Says Rava, who told you that pshat by Mitzorah? Pshat like I said. For some parts of it there's a kapara, and some parts you missed out. What do you mean? Hasam nami, when it says kippur means matan b'hainis. You don't have to go again. Rabbi Akiva says you have to repeat the whole exercise. And Rabbi Yochanan says, no, you don't have to repeat the whole exercise. You don't have to do the thumbs again. As far as the thumbs are concerned and the earlobes, that's done already. That's kapara. Like kippur mataraj, but the head, you missed like kippur. It's not only a question of nachas. You actually didn't do it. But nevertheless, you still yaitz the carbon and everything else. You still yaitz the material is all right, but you did not do it. Not a question of nachas. You actually missed out on the mitzvah. So the same thing over here. If you didn't do smicha, even though you did everything else, you did not do the smicha. Not that you did the smicha, but you're missing out on nachas. You didn't do it, so the mitzvah is missing. But still, kippur. Toshma coming here, we'll bring another proof. The question still remains. We want to know, so we haven't proved one way or another, really. We want to know whether the Avedas he did post the Hafrosha are forgiven or not forgiven. Yeah, we want to prove one way or another. So from Rava's case over there, we don't have proof one way or another. It could be that's talking about before the Hafrosha, it could be after the Hafrosha. We don't have a proof. So Toshma from the following. On Shavuos, we bring the Shteh HaLechem, and we also bring two lambs. We bring two animals, and these animals are for a kapara. And we had in Mor Shavuos, what's the kapara for the Yom Tov? The seirim, the goats you bring on Yom Tov is a kapara for tumas mikdash v'kedoshav. If somebody walked in the base of mikdash while they were tummy, or somebody ate a carbon while they were tummy, but they had no idea that they ever became tummy, and they had no idea, obviously, afterwards that they became tummy. Right? There was no idea before, no idea after. That's what you bring. Now the question is, why do you bring 2 animals, 2 kabbanas? Why wouldn't one suffice? So Rav Shimon comes along and asks the question. Tashma coming here, he says, Rav Shimon keeps the atzedes. What do you bring the kips atzedes? Well, where they come from? Why do you bring them? Someone asks the question, why do you bring them? Kips atzedes shlamim. The kvasim that you bring with the shtei alechem, they're shlamim, and that you have to bring with the shtei alechem. And the idea is to be matter the new wheat on the mizbech. From the carbon omer on the second day of Pesach allows us to eat the chodesh, but for the mizbech you have to wait till Shavuos till you bring the 2 loaves of bread from wheat with the 2 animals. You're right. So said Rav Shimon, my question was the goats of Yom Tov, you bring two goats, and these 2 goats are supposed to be a kapara for tumas migdash kedoshim. And let me I need 2 for. Al tumas migdash nizik damashal sharishin. Once you completed the first carbon, you sprinkle the blood. Sheni lama karev. What do you bring the second one for? And the answer is al tuma she'ira bein zelazeh. Any tumor that happened between the first carbon and the second carbon, it comes to atone. So Rav Shimon then says, so you can learn from here, we should be bringing korbanos every minute of the day because you're always over some kind of an assay without realizing it. How much money you have to spend and everything else. Just bring it on Yom Tov. Now, you set aside, right now we're assuming, you set aside both animals at the same time. You brought up one in the morning and you bring another one an hour later. And Shimon says, why you bring an hour later? To atone for all those, the tumas during that 1 hour. But it's already after the Hafrosha. You set it aside before Yom Tov. And if it's after the Hafrosha, how can it atone for anything that happens afterwards? What does this prove? That the carbon oil will atone not only for the Avedas that took place before the Hafrosha, but also for those Avedas that took place after the Hafrosha. So the Gemara here that say took place after the Hafrosha, the Kamechapra, and it still atones for it. Clear. It answers your question. So Gemara counters, who said, you made an assumption that you were mafresh both at the same time. Who said? Maybe you mafresh one on 4 days before Yom Tov, you set it aside to be ready, and the other one you mafresh 2 days before Yom Tov. So therefore, those 2 days, that's what we're talking about, the 2 days in between, not the hour in between you being makriv on Shavuos itself. Maybe if they were set aside at the same time, the second carbon is waste. You don't bring it. You know, when you bring a second carbon, that you mafresh it separately. And therefore, the interim period between the two hafrashes, that's what the carbon is coming to atone. Says the Gemara, well, you're going to tell me that this pasuk is limited only to a case where you will mafresh it first one carbon, and then a while later you mafresh a second. The pasuk doesn't qualify when you mafresh. Sounds like it doesn't matter, regardless. Even if you mafresh them together, the purpose of the second carbon is to atone for those assays that you did in between the two. So we see that's mafresh afterwards. So Amar Papa, so we repudiate that. L'chayr have a good raya. Says Papa, no raya from there. You know why? We're talking here about the carbon on Shavuos. This is not a private carbon. This is a communal carbon. And we have a rule. We had discussions in a few places. We'll have another place as well. We have a rule when it comes to a carbon tzibur. We have a concept called leiv bezdin masna alein. The bezdin intervenes, and even though the person who shechted had nothing in mind, the bezdin steps in and says that we want to make sure the carbon of the tzibur is effective, and therefore, even though you will mafresh them together, we're going to treat them as if one was nifresh a while, then, and the other was nifresh much later, so that we can include more of the mitzvahs asay in between. But maybe normally a carbon oil will only be atoned for those avedas that were done prior to the hafrasha. Lev Bezin comes in and makes a tanai as if to say that even though you made a hafrasha on Monday morning, it's not going to be treated as a hafrasha until much later, a second before Yom Tov. Where do you find this concept of Lev Bezin Masna Lein? Don't be Mishmul. Carbon tzibur, when it comes to a carbon tzibur, sakin moishchasan. So when you shecht it, right, that's when the carbon takes place. Lemashahein, the business steps in and says, we don't care what you have in mind. We're going to say that this sakin that you cut, that you shechted, is going to be for the carbon that's necessary right now. So we see that what the Lev Bezin steps in. So therefore, don't bring me a raya from Shavuos, because Shavuos, it's a carbon tzibur. Lev Bezin masnalein could be that the oil only forgives for those averas before the hafrasha. Why do you bring a second carbon on Shavuos? Because even though you were mafresh them both at the same time, because we are going to imagine, or the Bezin will make the second one hafrasha much later. Not the time that you did it, but we're going to push it off and delay it as long as possible, so that the second one can include more averas that the first one didn't. So Mara said, we're not happy with this answer, Rav Papa. Rabbi Yosef, Rav Papa, so Rabbi Yosef, the son of Rav Shmuel, said to Rav Papa, me, Islay, Rav Shimon, remember Rav Shimon. Rav Shimon doesn't believe in this concept of Lev Bezin Masna Lein. Because so your repudiation does not fit in with Rav Shimon. Can't be Rav Shmuel's of that view that this is Lev Bezin. Why not? We see that he doesn't hold of Lev Bezin. Because we know that a carbon has to be that comes with Chodesh Nisan. They use new coins for the carbonas, and you can no longer bring any carbon post Chodesh Nisan from the old money. It had to be purchased from the new money. So Rabbi Yechon said, so they bought a bunch of carbonas, animals, preparing them for a carbon tummy just in case. And you always buy extra to make sure that one of them has a mum, you have surplus. And it comes as Chodesh and you don't need them anymore. And you can't use these animals anymore for a carbon tummy post that day because it was bought with the old money. He says they were Divrei Rav Shimon, according to Rav Shimon, Ein Nivdin Tmimim. And the Divrei Chachamim Nivdin Tmimim. According to Chachamim, the din is if an animal was set aside for a carbon, you cannot redeem the animal unless it contracts a mum first. Unless it contracts a mum. So the Chachamim, however, say, and Rav Shimon therefore says that these animals cannot be redeemed while they're whole. You have to wait till they have a mum. However, the Chachamim say that Leiv Bezin Masna Lein, that if it turns out to be we no longer need these animals for carbon tumid, post Chodesh Nisan, then the Chacham will say retrospectively or retroactively, these animals were never really consecrated to be a carbon. They were only Kedushas Damim. They were only there, the value of the animal was sacred, it's consecrated, not the animal itself. And therefore, Kedushas Damim, you don't have to wait for a mum to be able to sell it and redeem it. And therefore they say sell it and put the money with the old money from last year. Whatever you did with the old money, remember with the old money, what they did with Rosh Hashanah, with the old money, they would buy animals and just use it as dessert for the Mizbeach, catch the Mizbeach all the time. So Chachamim hold lead bez the masna lane. Shimon does not hold lead bez masna lane. So you're a papa, but you wanted to say that don't bring a proof from Shavuos because they're just talking about lead bezna because the carbon zibur that doesn't fit in with Rab Shimon. That's number one. Boy, furthermore, Rabbi Yirmiyah asked Rab Zera a question. He asked the following question: Seide atzeres. These goats of Shavuos, shekibul daman b'shnei kaises. What happens? You receive the blood in two different cups, which means you already shechted it, and you already have the blood now in two different cups. The nizik damish edition, and you sprinkled the first blood. Isheni lama hubba. What is the second one for? Now we're talking about post shchita already. Rabbi Yirmiyah is going to ask a question. If you already shechted it, and then you bring and then you sprinkle the blood an hour later. So the first carbon you did, let's say 12 o'clock in the afternoon, and the second one, let's say you did 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Does the second one atone for those Avedas between 12 and 1? And what are we talking about here? We're not talking about post Hafrasha. We're talking about way beyond that. We're talking about post Shchita. Even though before we said that post Shchita, there's no question for Rava, but Rabbi Yirmiyah is asking a question. Maybe post Shchita, even so, even though you shechted already, maybe as long as you didn't sprinkle the blood, any Avedas that were done in the interim, the sprinkling will atone for. He says, and he answered him the tumah that took place between this zrika and that zrika. Is ad kala when was Rabbi Yirmiyah's question? He wanted to know if any avedas that were done after the shchita, can they be atoned, when you did the zrika. But any avedas did before the shchita, surely it could be atoned. We see from him that his view that you you could atone for all the all the avedas you did before the shchita, post the hafrasha. So we have an answer right here. Says the Gemara, it's a clear answer here. And don't tell me that by Shavuos they made it ze'achazeh, that they mafresh it separately. Here we see from Rabbi Yirmiyah that even they did it together, anything happened after the hafrasha can still be atoned. Says the Gemara, no. You can't prove anything from here. Rabbi Yirmiyah is continuing the question. Rabbi Yirmiyah is saying, if you're going to answer me that any aveda you did post the hafrasha will be atoned for by this carbon oila, what would you say about after you shechted the animal but you didn't sprinkle the blood yet? What about those carbonas? What would be there? And the answer that Rav Zayda was saying is based on that imtim shalemer as well. As Rashi says, we haven't then concluded, we didn't get not an answer to this particular question. So we remain with the question. Does it mechaper on Aveda, is it afterwards or not?